Today, we're going to be focusing our conversation on the current state of composting in our country, infrastructure, legislation, and what's to come for the composting industry. So for any of those of you who are new to the Better Earth community, Better Earth is a sustainable packaging provider based in Atlanta, and we're on a mission to make sustainability accessible. We'll be hosting quarterly webinars throughout the year where we'll be hosting industry leaders in our field, ranging from composters helping us kick off the year to plastic-free future activists and many more. So we hope to continue to see you guys throughout the year at these webinars and to learn how we can collaborate on closing the loop and creating a circular economy together. So as I mentioned, today we have a really exciting compost conversation in store with a powerful group of panelists and attendees. I'm personally so inspired by this group of panelists and the next generation of composters. So I'd like to introduce these industry leaders, starting with our composters in the Southeast. Kat Nigro, feel free to give us a wave. Kat Nigro is the Chief Experience Officer at CompostNow, a local collection service who empowers community members and businesses to compost. They've been involved in the community composting movement for the past 7 years. First, as the General Manager of Tilthy Rich Compost, a Durham bike-powered compost service, and now growing the compost movement with CompostNow. They're passionate about healthy soil, community building, and environmental justice. Leslie Rodgers is also here with us today. Leslie has grown with Atlas Organics since 2016. Beginning in education and engagement, Leslie gained solid skills to support organics diversion programs and compost utilization in all scales and environments. Currently, Director of Sales and Marketing, Leslie leads the team driving business opportunities for Atlas Organics. With 8 facilities and collection services in multiple markets, her team is versed in all aspects of organics recycling and end product sales. Invested in the expansion of composting infrastructure and establishing circular systems, Leslie is an active participant in growing compost infrastructure. She is a United States Composting Council Young Professional Leader, a Don't Waste Food South Carolina Ambassador, a trained Kiss the Ground Soil Advocate, and most recently, a member of the Biodegradable Products Institute Board of Directors, leading the first Composter and Municipality Committee for BPI. Next, we have Laura Howard. Laura operates the nation's largest mixed composting facility, Sevier Solid Waste. Here, she leads a team that processes all the waste from Sevier County, Tennessee, and the Great Smoky Mountains National Park through ooze and digesters to capture all the organic waste for compost. SSWI also accepts organic waste from private companies with zero waste goals from all over the Southeast. As part of her passion for composting, Laura began the Tennessee Composting Council, which is a state chapter of the Us Composting Council, with her colleagues from across the state of Tennessee. She currently serves as the president of this organization. Laura is driven to teach her 3 children to be good stewards of the earth. It's my goal to show my children how important it is to take care of our world. I focus on composting and recycling to ensure my kids understand the importance of limiting landfills. We also have Jesi Taylor joining us from New York. Jesi is a certified True Advisor, waste and racial justice consultant, journalist, and archivist whose research centers the impact of colonialism and mismanagement of chronically disenfranchised communities. She's also a philosophy graduate student whose work is at the intersection of discard studies, genocide studies, and critical theory. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. As I mentioned, we have an incredibly strong group of panelists that I'm so excited to hear from. We'll be dropping some resources in the chat that I highly encourage you read to learn more about composting in general and how you can advocate for the growth of composting infrastructure in your community and across the country. Before hearing from our panelists about legislation and industry trends in their region, I wanted to take a step back and set the stage. While no national policies currently exist in our country for composting, we're beginning to hear about composting at the federal level. The Compost Act was introduced last year. $100 million would go to increasing composting infrastructure in the Build Back Better Act. And composting was mentioned in the EPA's new timeline under the Biden administration. 5 states have composting and food waste laws. The most recent state bill will expand access to composting to every community in California. Major cities like Seattle, Austin, Portland, Boulder, Denver, New York City, San Francisco, and many, many more are launching or even mandating citywide composting programs. And according to the State of Composting in Our Country article by Brenda Platt of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and Nora Goldstein of Biocycle, there are currently 4,914 composting operations in the US. But only 347 of those accept food waste and 87 mixed organics. And a recent article by the Oregon Student Public Interest Research Group said that 326 towns and cities have access to food waste curbside collection, which is great, but that's less than 2% of Americans. So let's hear from our panelists on how their organizations and the composting industry is tackling legislation, access to infrastructure, and creating solutions. So we'll be covering 3 questions today to ensure that we save plenty of time for Q&A so that you guys can have a direct conversation with our composters hailing from the East Coast. So Leslie, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you on our first question. And then if you're comfortable with it, feel free to pass it to one of your fellow panelists, or I can help, navigate moderating and facilitating. But our first question that we're going to kick today off with is, what are you most excited about going on in the composting industry right now?
Yeah, thank you, Blair. Good afternoon, everyone. I think that, Blair, you said a lot of the things in your introduction. I'm so honored to be with these great minds and great hearts and energy around the composting space on this panel. I would say that, from 5 years ago when I was really getting into the industry to today, the words close the loop, sustainable infrastructure, circular economy, those are phrases and things that people are starting to understand. Legislation, that is a question that we ask now in these webinars and in these conversations, and that wasn't happening 5 years ago, especially in the Southeast. So I am just super excited that the discussion topics are evolving and getting us to a place where we're actually talking about real change and funding the impact that our communities and our society needs. And I would just say that where I try to focus some of my energy is not only on the diversion aspect of diverting the organics, but then also the finished product usage and the soil regeneration. And as long as we keep those messages really, really concise and together, partnered together, I think we'll do so much work in the next couple of years. And then if I could pass it on to Laura.
Oops, Laura, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I will do that a couple times. I apologize. Again, I'm so excited also to be here. So that's one of the things I'm most excited about the composting industry right now, is that I love being on a webinar just full of women, because a few years ago when I first started this, 6 or 7 years ago, I would walk into a room and be the only female there. So I love having so many of us in this space talking about composting and just having these great intelligent conversations. The trends that I'm still passionate about is I love seeing the grassroots efforts. I work for Sevier Solid Waste. So we are at the municipal level, and we accept waste, again, from 3 different cities. And so I love seeing these grassroots efforts across the state of Tennessee. Currently, like I said, we were we've developed the Tennessee Composting Council, and I love that that gets together manufacturers, it gets end users, it gets the composters, and we're all together at these very informal events, and we're bringing ideas that only makes composting better and also just improves the whole process through the entire loop. The fact that we have Tennessee Environmental Council also as part of our group, and they are another grassroots efforts that's getting people to talk about composting more and sharing their compost stories, both at residential and at the company level. So I think that's exciting. And the last trend that really excites me is just seeing those mandates like the state of California that's requiring it. Here in Sevier County, there's not any legislature, but we have created our composting facility, and then we have a local ordinance that requires all the waste to be brought to our facility. So there's no individual action responsibility. Our residents do not sort at the curbside. The responsibility really falls on the cities to bring it to us. So we do have that ordinance, but I really like to see this new trend from the state, from California and things that are providing more access to composting. And then I'll pass the torch on to Jesi.
Hi, everyone. I also just want to echo Leslie and Laura's sentiments and say how excited I am to be on this panel here and just to see just all the excitement that everybody else has as well. And just to kind of piggyback off of what Laura was saying, I'm most excited about all of the grassroots efforts that are really forming all over the world, really, to really not only raise awareness for what composting is, how it works, why it's important, etc. But I'm also really excited about how many people from such vastly different industries and fields are coming together to bring their unique experiences and knowledge to the composting industry. From artists to poets to people that make music, documentarians. And so there are so many people joining the composting industry that have such unique and diverse backgrounds. And it makes for some really interesting conversations, but it also makes for some really interesting, ways of reaching people, because we're coming together to create programming, we're creating resource guides, websites, etc. And it's just really fun to see how creative we can all get when we pool our resources and let everybody show up with their own unique backgrounds and bring it to the industry. And I will pass it along.
And I will grab it. Thank you, Jesi. Thanks for having me all. I'm so excited. I'm going to echo what everybody just said. What I am most excited about right now is momentum. I feel like there's so much momentum in this industry right now. I can feel it. And it's really exciting. It almost feels like how I imagine like recycling felt in the 90s, right? At the time, there was a statewide ban of landfilling all recyclables. And at that time, there was only about a 20% participation rate. And then you fast forward to today, or some communities are up to 75%. What can this industry be in 20 years? I am so excited. And because of the people on this panel, I'm even more excited because, Jesi, like you said, there's so many creative minds at work in this industry. And there's something about it, which I hope we touch on later, that really draws all different types of people into this movement. And I think it's because we're really coming at it with an open mind, right? We're really reimagining what waste is and what it feels like in society. And I just get so excited when I'm on a panel like this, and I just can't wait for this discussion. So that's what I'm excited about.
Thank you so much, Kat, and all the other panelists. Like you said, momentum, it's just for any of those of us who have been here in the industry for a couple years, like you feel it, especially, at things like Compost 2022 and, all these different events where we're able to come together and just like today, talk compost. So diving into our next question, what does composting infrastructure or legislation look like in your community or region of the country? So we have 3 panelists from the Southeast. So Jesi, if you don't mind, I'm going to let you kick us off. And then, we'll kind of hear all about the Southeast after you share a little bit about what's going on up in the Northeast or, other areas of the country that you're familiar with.
Sure. So I'll just start with New York City, and I'll say composting infrastructure and legislation here looks like a work in progress. There were fighting some really difficult things right now in terms of budget and pushback, and it's one reason I'm really excited about the momentum as well, because we have, how do I put this? It's tricky to answer this question just because right now there's a lot going on with budget stuff, and we're kind of fighting really hard to make sure that we can actually have access to community composting still. But I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on how many grassroots organizations right now are working to educate communities, make information about composting legislation and infrastructure as accessible as possible. And because of that, we're seeing so many more people at city council meetings, town halls, people sharing testimonies, writing in testimonies, so many more articles being written. And so, yeah, I feel like in New York City specifically, what we're seeing right now is just a boost in how many people are understanding how important composting is. And they're also realizing that we're being deprived of a really important resource. And so when I say work in progress, because I feel like we're, kind of looking to some other cities that have some really great models in place and seeing what we can do to bring something like that to New York City and expand the programs that we already have in place, like the growing curbside pickup program, which is in danger of being, it's being heavily impacted right now by changing administration stuff going on right now. But I'm incredibly, incredibly excited by how many local orgs, the Senate type of mandated organics recycling program. So that's what's going on here. And I'm really excited to hear about what's going on in the Southeast so we can get some pointers and bring them back over here. I'll pass it to Kat.
Wow, wow, wow. Yeah, I've been keeping track of New York, Jesi. Well, I feel like, Blair, correct me if I'm wrong. Leslie, I would really like to hear your thoughts. Obviously, as somebody at Atlas Organics, you are a processing facility. You have multiple in the Southeast. I would love your take on it first before I jump in. I just feel like I'd be overstepping with you in the room, as well as Laura. Both of you, please step in first, and then I can talk on the community composting side.
Yeah, well, so I was just going to talk about, North Carolina. So I think the big for the Southeast is that where I see where we are right now, Atlas operates in 5 states in the Southeast, and I'm seeing the organization. We're watching. The Southeast is watching. The West, California, Washington just had a bill. New York City, Jesi, we're watching what you all are doing. We're taking notes. We're listening. We are preparing for what you're going through right now in our communities and in our states. I would say that they're really forward-thinking municipalities that are trying to figure it out, earnestly really working to try to figure out how to make it work, what the logistics are. City of San Antonio has a green cart program. That's the one municipality that we have. Durham is piloting a food waste program as well. So there's a lot of energy, and there's a lot of really intelligent people putting their minds together to figure out how we can make what's happening in other areas of our country happen in the Southeast. And yeah, Laura and Kat, you absolutely, their procurement bills, I'll pass it on.
I'll jump in. We approached it from a different perspective. Severe solid waste was actually, we started composting after a very heated public meeting. So in the state of Tennessee, once you go to permit a landfill, you had to take it to a public hearing. And in this particular public hearing, it got very heated. The residents did not want to have a landfill in their backyard. So after that, our mayor of our county said he would never permit another class 1 landfill in the county. So they began a waste audit study, which at that time was very innovative because they didn't do waste audit studies And so they decided, after looking at the waste stream here at Sevier County, we're at the foothills of Smoky Mountains, so they didn't want to look at, as burning waste. And so then we looked at incineration, and then they looked at our waste stream and said that the 60% of our waste is organics. So they knew they had to tackle that. So they didn't approach it from a soil perspective. They approached it as, we need to figure out how to avoid having more landfills. And so that's how they started Sevier Solid Waste, and back in 1992. And then what they did was, to ensure that we had enough of that waste stream to keep the large amount of organics coming to our facility, they passed ordinances between the 3 cities and the county that said, okay, all the waste has to come here and come to our county. It can't be taken out of our county. And that way we can guarantee to keep those organic waste here coming to our facility. And so that's how we began. And what we really lack now, because we have the organics coming to us, we're looking for the other side of the loop now, is that we don't have the infrastructure to get rid of all the compost that we make. We make so much compost here in Sevier County. And when it first started, we were much more agricultural, and now we get more and more development, more and more tourist areas. And so now our struggle really is on the other side, is to close that loop as to using our compost. And so we're trying to really educate development contractors to use it for soil erosion control and things of that nature, versus agricultural, because we're getting less and less farms here, and more, cabins and attractions are coming up in our area. But we are excited to see that other communities around us, like the city of Knoxville, they just recently started a drop-off program for their city. So we're excited to see more and more people around our area doing it as well.
Oh, amazing. I'm from Tennessee, Laura. That makes me so happy to hear. Oh, amazing. Okay, here's kind of my take on this question, right? What I am seeing and what CompostNow is seeing is just, and this is a very simple answer to a complex question, but there's just a lack of infrastructure in the Southeast. Real quick, a quick stat from BioCycle from last year's report. There's 52 facilities permitted for composting in North Carolina, but only 15 are actually accepting food scraps right now. And that is outdated. That's from 2021, but 15 facilities in North Carolina, the entire state. In Georgia, that's less. What we're seeing right now is we're seeing an increase in demand of composting services across the Southeast, right? And that's because of a lot of economic incentivizing, but also an increase of awareness in our society about the importance of composting. We can agree, right? You see composting in the media more and more. Every time I see it in a news headline, I get shocked. I'm so excited. So what we're seeing is this demand is growing, but the infrastructure is not growing at that same pace. And we're oftentimes focused on growing the awareness, but not focused on what we're going to do to keep up with that demand, right? And when I talk about infrastructure, I'm not really talking about the logistics infrastructure. I think community composters and other haulers are doing their best to really scale that side of the infrastructure piece. What I'm talking about is the actual processing infrastructure. And the reason, and that's a really big question of why we're seeing that struggle, like what is preventing us from increasing facilities across the Southeast. And I think we can look to legislation, right? There's a lack of legislation in the Southeast. And I think, and this is just from our purview, is there's kind of this disconnect between entities, right? Composting is a well-known entity with departments like the Environmental Protections Department and departments of natural resources. But when we get to a local and county level, I'm talking the planning and like the planning departments and the people who are actually permitting and siting these facilities, there's a disconnect. And it's extremely hard right now, one, to find ag or industrial land to buy or to be able to process on. And that's because, well, from what we're seeing is that it's being encroached by development and other competing interests. So just finding land where there's support by the county, support by the surrounding community is extremely hard. So I feel like that's a really big pain point in this industry that we're seeing in the Southeast. facility permitted. I mean, Leslie, you can talk on that way more than me, but it's a big challenge that we're facing. And to be able to truly make an impact on these really aggressive waste reduction goals that we often see cities coming out with, we have to think about how we're actually going to get there on a larger scale. And it's going to take a bunch of different models to actually handle the amount of food scraps that we're seeing, right? It's going to be small scale, large scale, decentralized, centralized. It's going to take us all. But if we do not have these facilities, these commercial facilities, we won't be able to make a dent. And that's what I'm saying.
Thank you guys so much. I know I just learned something, just in that, 5 to 7 minutes. So I hope all of our attendees as well are getting a better look into some of, the exciting things we have going on with infrastructure and legislation on the East Coast, and some of the barriers to entry, and, how we can all, as a group here on this call today, pool resources, collaborate, and continue to increase, not only legislation, but also infrastructure, so that we don't create a cart before the horse kind of situation, or vice versa. So thank you guys so much for that input. Diving into our next question, we had a lot of interest from our registered participants on, how they can get involved. So could you guys elaborate on what do we need to be doing to advocate for more composting infrastructure in our country? And what are ways that specifically individuals can get involved? I know we just touched on that a good bit, but if y'all could really give us a roadmap, if you will, that would be great. Or, just any tips for individuals to get involved, and that may look like starting, just composting at home, to how they can activate their community. And I guess we will start with Laura, if you don't mind. I don't think we've started with you yet.
Sure. Well, I touched on this just a minute ago, my last answer, but again, Sevier Solid Waste really started because some residents that were very upset about having a landfill in their backyard went to this commission meeting and they voiced their opinion. So I cannot emphasize enough that voicing your opinion, going to those public meetings when they are available, use your voice and go, because that's truly how we started. And, now, we divert 70% of our waste from the landfill, and 60% of that is organic waste. So those couple residents that were there voicing their opinion has made a huge impact on our community. So that's for one, and definitely participate and be the example. So definitely be doing that. And really, again, I always say try to influence the sphere of influence that you have, impact that. I would always like to talk about when you go to a restaurant and you see someone using compostable straws or products. I always ask those questions like, where are these going? Because sometimes there's a disconnect there, but it opens that table of conversation. And I love just asking and raising awareness at every opportunity I get. And I think that really starts making a difference, because when guests keep hearing those, like if you're in a business and you keep asking those questions, whether or not they're composting or what they're doing, and they keep hearing that over and over and over again, they're going to go back and ask their bosses. And then their bosses are going to feel like, hey, this is really important to our guests. And we see that a lot in our tourist community, is that some people reach out to us to tell our story because the guests are asking for it. So I would encourage individuals not only to speak to elected officials, but just talk about it, because when you ask businesses and put pressures on the businesses, that is going to get them to make change too, because they really want to listen to their guests' feedback. And I will pass it on to Leslie.
Thanks, Laura. Well, you just mentioned something that I was going to suggest. So yes, even if you know there's not a compostable option, ask, speak up. I would say that every single time you read an article, like it, follow people that are composting or organizations that are in the sustainable space. Follow them on Instagram, follow them on socials, share their posts. Pay attention, even if it's just a quick thumbs up or a like, look at what's happening on the legislation. In the legislation sphere, I know BPI posts regularly on what's happening in the different states. Brenda's been putting some really great links in the chat. I think that the biggest thing that you can do on an individual basis is be a part of the conversation. Just like you showed up today, show up and spend 5 to 10 minutes reading an article from a reliable source. What's compostable versus biodegradable? Know the words so that you can pass on the right information and be part of the positive change and help just direct the people in your world, the people that care. Be a leader. Do you want me to pass it on? Let's see, Jesi, can you comment?
Sure. So a lot of what's been said already is where I was going to go, but I do want to touch a bit on just the very harsh reality that sometimes you're going to be up against a lot, and it may lead you to feel a bit helpless or a bit hopeless, or like, what are we doing? They're like literally not ensuring that we have the infrastructure that we need to be able to meet these goals that they're setting for us. And they're not putting their money where their mouth is, or they say they want to meet these goals, but then they slash budgets. The number one thing I always tell people is get to know your neighbors. Like, get to know your neighbors who lives in your immediate community. What do you bring to the table? Learn what they bring to the table and see how you together can pool your resources, pool your skills, your unique tools that you have in your own toolbox to see what you can do at the local level while we're still waiting for the larger scale infrastructure to come to us. We don't know how long it'll take for it to get to us, how long it'll take to be built. But just speaking from New York, an example, so much of this work is done by people that are volunteering their time, so much of it. Such a large percentage of it is people who, they have full-time jobs, they have kids, they're disabled, they are in school, they're working multiple jobs, and they're still volunteering their time on a daily, sometimes basis to advocate and talk to their local representatives and build community and make sure that these coalitions keep their momentum up. And so I just think it's really important to just focus as much as you possibly can on building community at a hyper local scale to see what can be done. Who's got backyards, who has access to local community gardens, who has a little area in the back of the school that they work at, or a hospital rooftop, or just some little rain garden or bioswale somewhere in their community, and just stick as close to you as you can to see what can tangibly, realistically, seriously get done while we wait, so that something's being done while we're still waiting. And that's my 2 cents, and I'll pass it to Kat.
Amazing, Jesi. I'm a big fan of you right now. When I think about change, that's hard, right? That's a big thing. I think often it takes 3 kind of responsibilities: an individual responsibility, policy, and corporations, right? A corporate responsibility. And as an individual, we have this amazing opportunity to really touch all three of those change levers. The first is individual. We must take action on an individual level. In a community garden or using a service, the most important part is that you're composting. Please. And then from 2, you can affect policy just by the way Laura just described with her very real story. And then obviously apply a lot of pressure at the corporate level, right? Corporations, businesses, restaurants, they rely on consumer demand. And that's where we come in and how we can influence that. So I'll leave it at that.
May I jump back in real quick? I'd be remiss also just to say to join those different organizations like the Us Composting Council and for us we have the Tennessee State Composting Council. Those organizations often have advocacy branches, and so if you really are wanting to get involved, there's so many different nonprofit organizations out there that are always looking for volunteers and membership as well. So if you just kind of Google and look around you, join one of those.
I'm going to jump back in real quickly. I'll be as quick as I can. I also just want to, I can't recommend enough getting involved in the USCC happenings. Any ones you could possibly get involved in, ever since becoming a member and going to the recent conference. It's honestly, truly life-changing. getting involved with people who are not only as passionate or more passionate than you are about composting, but there's somebody in every state who can connect you to some type of resource that can help you on your way. So I cannot recommend it enough. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. Completely ditto exactly what you say about USCC and some of the other amazing resources out there in our industry. It's so motivating to see that over 50 people joined this call today to talk compost together. And I think that just shows that momentum that you were speaking to earlier, Kat. So we want to thank each and every one of our panelists for the work that you and your organizations are doing. And we want to thank all the attendees for showing up to have these compost conversations. And we're really thankful to have representation from such esteemed organizations across our industry and, you know, our allies in the advocacy community. I see you guys in the, you know, in the attendee list. So thank you guys all so much for, you know, coming here today. Like I said, we wanted to save plenty of time for Q&A today so that we can have a genuine compost conversation. So for any of you guys who have questions, feel free to go ahead and throw those in the chat. Or like I said, use the raise hand feature. We'll call on you. I'm going to work on unmuting everyone, still trying to learn how to tech 3 years into the pandemic. So the Better Earth team will be working on that. But we do have some questions in the chat that I'm going to go ahead and start reading out for some of our panelists. Whoever feels like, you know, they want to speak to it, go ahead and hop in. Or if you have a question for a specific panelist, feel free to, you know, specify that in the chat or when asking your question. But we'll go ahead and get started, like I said, with some of those questions that have already been entered. There are a bunch of them and a bunch of great resources. So thank you, thank you, thank you to the attendees like Brenda who have been putting those in the chat. Highly encourage everyone to go in and read those. So let's see, Kat, how do you recommend we advocate for composting infrastructure when there is a lack of policy in the Southeast? Can private individuals offer their land for your sites? That's coming from Jill Wu at Gooder.
Nice. Well, it just depends on where your site's located and what it's permitted for use. So that was kind of what I was touching. Can y'all hear me?
We can now.
Okay. Rock on. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it just really depends on what your land is cited for. Like I was mentioning, just that disconnect between, you know, awareness, right? Where are these sites? How are they being permitted? Who's deciding, right? A lot of these legislation is, it's old. We need to update it. We need to take another look at how our urban spaces are being formed and who's deciding that and who has power and control, and we need to influence it. A very simple way is show up to your city council meetings, right? I mean, I feel like maybe it's a really challenging thing to get involved in local politics, but it's so important, and that's how change happens. That's truly how change happens. We talk a lot about voting with your dollar and voting with your actual vote on a national level, but a lot of the change happens on a local level. And so getting involved there and supporting those local initiatives is so important.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they would like to add specifically around, I know we've touched a lot on legislation, but advocating for composting infrastructure when there is a lack of policy and if private individuals can offer their land for composting sites?
If I could just add, I know, you know, we see surveys everywhere, and I know it can be redundant, but there are organizations, there are nonprofits, there are municipalities that are seeking feedback. And, you know, if you could take the surveys, or again, yes, attend a meeting, even fill out some of the form letters and send it to your elected officials. Those add up, and they add up quickly. And you know, when a decision needs to be made, and those numbers are calculated and weighed, your voice is going to be heard. So I would just encourage you to be on the lookout for spaces and ways to voice your desire for composting infrastructure.
Thank you. So we have some other really great questions coming in. I'm gonna ask one question about commercial composters or in facilities, and then 2 questions came in back to back about compostable packaging. So first question, are commercial composters typically profitable? If anyone feels comfortable speaking to that, and anyone who might be interested in getting into the composting business, any insights you guys can provide, that would be great.
I can
Go
say,
ahead, please.
I was just saying, I worked at the government level, but I do see our financials, and I can tell you it absolutely can be profitable. There's different challenges, of course, but yes, it can be profitable.
I would echo that. Composting is another recycling business.
Awesome. Thank you guys for those insights. So now we've had 2 regarding compostable packaging. I want to hear from you guys, from composters, your thoughts on compostable packaging, your interactions with it. First question would be, how does compostable ware fit into your composting activities? I'm assuming at your site and with your composting technology. And then the second question that's also, or we'll ask that one first, and then we'll dive into the second one.
I can jump in. I hate to keep jumping in, but because we're a large commercial, we operate 5 digesters, and we take in about 300 to 600 tons of waste every day. So it depends on what time of year. But regardless, we have tested so many different compostable products, and we can compost them in our facility. So it's great for us because it's less things that we have to recycle, to landfill. What we do is we put all of our waste through these digesters, and then we screen off the inorganics. So if the packaging is coming in compostable versus non-compostable, we love it because it's less going in the landfill.
Anyone else?
I can chime in here. So Atlas Organics does process certified compostable products. We do see it as a vehicle to increase diversion and an access to the food waste that actually, is our piles need. We use extended aerated static pile method of composting. And I would say that around the certified compostables, I just really advocate for clear, consistent messaging and visual representation that is different than the traditional recycled product, and coupled with education.
I love that. I wanted to add to that. At CompostNow, we do accept compostable serviceware with our programs. And yeah, the commercial facilities that we partner with accept it, obviously. And to echo what Leslie said, we find it like an amazing opportunity to capture more food residuals. But more than that, we know as a society, we need to move away from fossil fuels and petroleum-based products. And this is such an excellent way to do that. And I know that there are some issues in the industry, messaging being a big one, absolutely, and contamination being another one. But what gets me so excited is that this is still such a young industry, the compostable serviceware industry, right? And people like Better Earth are making such progressive strides, and we're seeing it get better and better and better. And that is a way for us as a company to support the industry at large, is to accept those materials. We're also distributors as well. So it's really exciting to see just in a couple of years the improvements that are being made in compostable products. So shout out Better Earth.
Thanks, Kat. So to keep us moving right along, we have so many questions coming in, and I do want to save at least 10 minutes for people to, turn off their mics and ask questions for of you guys. So a couple more from corporate perspective. How can we support our compost facility or your compost facility other than hauling fees? How can corporations get involved and support the compost movement? Feel free to jump in, Laura. I know you want.
How much weight to see somebody else want to do first? For us, again, so we're very different in that we take all MSW from all corporations, and our biggest struggle is that corporations put things into the dumpsters that should not be there. So that it goes back to that contamination. And so really kind of educating yourself on what the composters accept and do not accept, and what happens when you put those things in there that do not, because a lot of times it can destroy our equipment. And then if that happens, we may have to landfill. So now we're not capturing anything. It's not just an inconvenience. It truly can sometimes be catastrophic. So I think the best thing you can do is get with your composters, your local composters, understand how the process works, what they can and cannot take, and then please follow those guidelines. Leslie, do you have anything to add?
So I would say here, the impact that a corporation can have internally and externally when they have published, advertised sustainability goals, zero waste to landfill goals. Yes, that does go to the hauling, but I think it's more than that. If a corporation is spending the time, the money, the resources that you have, and saying we are committing to this, and we're committing as a company, everyone involved here is going to work together to these goals. The impact of that on people like to see other people do things first, and if the corporation figures out and is detailing and specifying for their employees how to do something, or why it's better, or what they could do at home to make a difference, it's a way that you can make an impact with your team, and then talk about that with your local communities and the country, wherever you're operating. I would also say that we partner with some amazing corporations that, it's springtime. Everyone's talking about their gardens, their flowers, working on that project that they've been dying to do over the cold winter. And they've basically gotten compost from us in truckloads and given it away to their employees. It's a great way to visualize the close the loop. Especially if you have hauling or any kind of waste reduction in your facilities, having that compost at the end, and then having that employee take that home and benefit in their own yards and in their own flower pots. It is very, very impactful, and it's a memory that they'll keep and talk about. And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to increase knowledge in accurate ways, and we want to increase engagement and the ability for someone to share with someone else.
I just want to add something that actually speaks exactly to how you just finished what you just said. So I don't work with a corporation, but I've consulted with them before. And honestly, some things that corporations can do is, change up your programming in your buildings, whatever type of actual physical buildings you have, whether you have elevator screens, signage throughout the building, put some educational materials on there that are about composting. Educate the people that are coming in and out of your buildings. If you have a newsletter that goes up bi-weekly, put in some resources in there. Sponsor local community gardens that can process compost and then feed it back into food gardens. Sponsor grants for people that live in communities to create their own ideas to solve food waste or composting related issues. Just see if there's money you can set aside to develop, extensive programming, whether it's social media in your building, bring people on to give presentations, workshops in your corporation so that they can go back, take that information, like Leslie was saying, bring it to their communities, bring it home, and just really drive that engagement as much as you possibly can.
Thank you so much, Jesi. What a good, strong way to round us out with some actionable items, both at the corporate level and individual level. A lot of people can take those same exact steps, whether they're, at their work, in their home, in their communities, in their schools. I saw a shout out to schools in the chat. and how powerful, school systems are, and how educating our students, how powerful that can be. So thank you guys so much for all these, like I said, actionable items for us to go out and activate and advocate for the growth of the composting movement. So we have, about 10-ish minutes. So I am going to unmute everyone. So feel free to hop in, ask our composters any questions that you might have, or raise your hand and we'll call on you. Panelists, if you feel comfortable with sharing your personal information or your organization's information, I know there was a lot of questions that we didn't get to yet from the chat and from the registration form. So if people, are curious about composting or have specific questions for you and you're happy to answer them, I would encourage you to share some form of contact, even if that's at the organizational level. We also, in the webinar page, shared some resources as well to just learn about the basics of composting. If you came to this webinar just wanting to learn what is composting, there's some amazing resources out there for you. So Kiss the Ground, USCC, ILSR, so many different organizations. There's also a lot of resources within the chat that have been shared today. So lots of information for you to learn from. Pressing the allow mic button now. I'll stop talking so you guys can start talking.
Thank you, Blair. Excellent.
Thank you. All right. Well, you guys, if you have questions, like I said, raise your hand or unmute yourself. All right. Well, I do have some additional questions prepared since I'm dirt myself, if you will. I'm going to give it about 30 more seconds to see if anybody else wants to jump in and ask any questions. But definitely have some more questions prepared to keep this good conversation going.
Sure, I can go. This is Jill from Gooder again. Thanks, guys, for sharing all about your experiences. So I am part of like a local just a grassroots matter of climate action groups in Gwinnett. And what would be the best way, I guess, to progress to like build composting infrastructure? Because we are planning to talk to our sustainability office, but we don't have a waste management plan or waste diversion plan. And so if there isn't that kind of planning, how do you, what do you find is most effective to actually grow some infrastructure? For example, for a lot of the restaurants, especially the Asian restaurants, where people already know about composting, but just need the infrastructure in place.
I mean, the first thing I would recommend would be to find some type of local service that does waste audits and just start from there, see how much waste you're generating, what types of waste you're generating, and get some expert advice for how you can move forward. And I feel like the first place to start would be to get a waste audit.
I'll just echo that. Waste audits, that was what also after that commission meeting, that was the first step they took, was the waste audit. And I think that way you can also start realizing how much money is being spent landfilling waste versus, and look at other opportunities. And that's when you get people's attention with money. So I would definitely start with the waste audit. And also then we also realized we had to, if we had to pull in people, and that's why we started that interlocal agreement, is because we realized how much waste was in different areas, whether it's from the city or, Gatlinburg waste. So it was a lot more restaurants, has a lot more organic waste than, say, our county waste, with primarily residents. So that waste audit is crucial.
That was a great question and great answers. Does anybody else have any questions for our panelists? All right, well, I have one last question. Jesi, I know that I believe either you or maybe it was Kat had touched on it earlier. So something that really inspires, myself and our team, something that we came away from Compost 2022 particularly inspired by was that community composters have rich values rooted in sustainability, food sovereignty, and social equity. So what do you think about the composting industry nurtures such an inclusive workforce, and how do you think other industries can learn from the composting community? Kind of switch it up to wrap us up.
Ooh, so did you want me to start? I wasn't sure. Okay. Yeah, at USDC this year, I was part of a DEI panel that ended with some really interesting questions. And I feel like my immediate response I'm going to say is that the composting industry, like all industries, has a lot of work to do. And so, be that as it may, I think it is incredible that people that are, in positions of power in some composting organizations at all scales, they're really starting to recognize the impacts that, things like racism, transphobia, classism, etc., have had on the composting industry since forever. And they're really consulting with people to see what they can do to address that and prevent things from happening in the future. And this is important not only because, there's so many more jobs in composting and recycling than there are in a lot of other industries of this nature. And so, yeah, I don't know, I struggle to find the words just because it is so difficult. And it's not just this industry, it's so many industries that are struggling. But knowing that there really is just this concerted effort and this commitment to increasing inclusivity and increasing transparency at all levels of the composting industry with people that are already working in them to say, this is what's been going on, this is how we can improve things, and this is how we can make sure that, these barriers to access to the industry don't continue happening. And also just being a lot more honest about how the benefits of composting could impact chronically disenfranchised communities. I think that's one of my favorite things, is just realizing there are so many benefits that we have here, mitigating stormwater, increasing soil health, and increasing biodiversity. There are so many different things that composting can do when we bring it to communities that just have either never had this or severely need it. I think that's been the most wonderful thing, is really sharing that wealth of everything that composting can give.
Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to speak to, the work that your industry, is doing?
I think I can't follow that, but I'll try. Something I want to touch on that I think is so interesting is I feel like with this industry, you get so many folks that come into this industry in a variety of different ways with a variety of different interests, right? And I think it's because I still haven't quite pinpointed it, but I think it's because our soil touches our humanity, right? Soil is a part of everything. And I have a little game where I'm like, regardless of your interest or what you are passionate about, I bet I can connect it to the soil, right? Let's talk about, oh, you love technology. Let's talk about the new technology in this industry that helps us be able to monitor piles. Looking at you, we radiate in New York. Or, oh, you're really interested in co-op models. Okay, looking at you, Rust Belt Rider, right? No matter what you're interested in, I really feel like you have a home in the composting industry. I really do. And I think it's because, soil creates healthy food, and that touches all of us. And I just think it is such a beautiful industry in that way, right? And I think it's a low barrier of entry. You can just have a bike and start composting. That's what we did with Tilthy Rich, right? Like, you don't need a lot. You just need the passion and the determination to do it. And that's what I love. And I hope that we can always maintain that as we grow in this industry.
I can't agree more with the passion. That's the first thing I thought of, is that I think our industry, let's be honest, so many times in composting, I know in my world, it's food waste. It's not fun. It's not glamorous. It's, we always say that saving the world is hard, but so people that work with us are very passionate. You have to be, or to be working in that environment. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that passion. And then like Kat was saying, is that soil touches everybody. So the healthy soil and the food. And so I think that's really what this composting industry leads itself to, that is that you have to be passionate. And again, it touches everybody. So.
And Blair, if I could just add to all those wonderful thoughts. With compost, you're encouraging and looking to improve a situation over time. It's not a short-term fix. It's a long-term investment for a better life, a better environment, a better community, better access, higher quality food. So, just like, Kat, everyone was saying, it brings people, composting is a natural process. It happens whether we choose to actively manage it or support it or not. And that touches everyone and everything. And the more that you get in touch with that natural cycle, even to growing plants, seed to plant to flower or fruit, that long investment, that connection to the process is, I think, what is unique in every aspect of our industry and how we interact with the local communities.
Thank you guys so much for all those insights. As I mentioned, I was so inspired by each and every one of you before this webinar, and walking away, I'm just even more inspired and ready to go out there and advocate for composting in my community. Thank you guys so much again, and thank you to everyone who joined us. I hope everyone has a great rest of their afternoon, and go compost!